All right, so we're going to be talking in lesson 313 about what kind of relationship we have. So in our past this week, we've talked about rotations, translations, and reflections. We started with reflections, and what that meant was that we flipped it over a line. Then translation meant that it was slid to the left, right, up, down, diagonally. It's a slide. And then we had our turn if we rotated around a point. Now, our question today will be, how do we figure out what's going on and what happens when these things are happening? So here we have in this question, so we're going to figure out how to label stuff. That's what we just did. And then we're going to learn about the relationships to predict where it's going to land. So at the right, triangle PQR, this one, was reflected across line L to form triangle PQR. P prime, Q prime, R prime. Describe the relationship of the original triangle and its image to the line of reflection. So we know it's a reflection. But what is the relationship? So if I were to connect R to R prime and do so very carefully, I could notice what was happening. And so the first thing I want to do is find the slope of line L. So the slope of line L is from here to there, up 2 over 1. So the slope of line L is 2 over 1. And now that I have that, I can use that information to figure out what's going on with this new line segment I just drew. So in my new line segment, we have a slope of between R and R prime. So we refer to that as line segment R prime. And the slope of that line segment is 1 over 2, but it's negative 1 because it's going down and it's going 2 to the right. So it's negative 1/2. And if I were to connect Q to Q prime, again doing so very carefully, which I wasn't as careful this time, Q to Q prime. Okay, let's see if we're caught up. Q to Q prime, like so. And again, once to check the slope, you can see kind of a relationship between the two red lines I have here, that they seem to be parallel to each other. And if we were to draw that, we can see that the slope of Q to Q prime is also negative 1 over 2. Then our last check will be to connect P to P prime. Now this one's going to be harder because P is in the middle of a square and so is P prime. And so it is really hard to tell what is happening between those two. But as I look at the picture, all of the red lines do appear to be parallel. And so by investigation, I'm going to say that the slopes are the same. And then the next question is, what is the relationship between these two slopes, negative 1/2 and 2 over 1? And I notice that they are reciprocals. And reciprocal is that big word that means I flipped over my fraction. And so let me just write that down, and flipped over fraction. And that they are different signs. That's the next thing I notice. So they are reciprocals and the signs have changed. We're going to call that opposite. That's just, one is negative and one is positive. So they're reciprocals and they're opposites. And that's an important thing. We want to kind of keep that idea in mind. And does anyone already know what that means when we have opposite reciprocals or reciprocals that are opposite signs? And since you're not here listening to me, I'm going to just tell you. When a slope and its opposite, reciprocals, slopes are perpendicular, is the word. So there's perpendicular lines, and the symbol here means perpendicular. I'm going to use that symbol a lot because it's a lot easier to get right than to spell the word perpendicular. And you can notice right here that there is, between this dashed line and the red line, that we get a right angle. And so that's what we notice. It's a pretty cool thing. So continuing on to our next problem. I don't have tracing paper to use, so you have to bear with me as I do my best impression of tracing paper. And I have an idea and I'll use it, but it's a little different. We've got our starting value of -4. And then my next one is, my slope is 3/5, so I'm going to go up 3 and over 5, up 3 over 5, down 3 left 5, and down 3 left 5, and I have those dots. I will use my tool to help me draw a straight line. That's not it. That's not the one I want. Straight line drawing tool, that's right here. Right there is my straight line drawer. And so I can't actually draw a crooked line, you notice that? And I'm actually not through the right point, so I'm going to start over. It's easier to start down there. And then I have to have a straight line. The other thing I'm going to do to make my tracing, my tool, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this line and make it blue, and that will be my patty paper line. So I've got my red line is the original and the blue line is my patty paper line. So it says so we've started by graphing the line. I've used the blue line to represent my tracing paper. Now I'm going to translate this line up 5 squares. So it would help if I had dots on my tracing paper, but so make sure when you do it, put the dots on the line. So that's 1 square, 2 squares, 3 squares, 4 squares, and 5 squares. That is my new line. So it wants to write the equation of the resulting image. So right here. And so my equation is y equals, my slope is the same. Go ahead and put some dots on that. So you can see that my slope is the same. And so y equals 3/5 x plus 1. And so the relationship is that it's been moved up 5. They're parallel. So the relationship is parallel lines. And just like perpendicular, parallel has an abbreviation. And that is 2 long skinny lines next to each other. So parallel lines is represented with this symbol. And their slopes are the same. Okay. So now it wants us to use tracing paper again. So go ahead and pause the screen if you haven't already and get this picture, because I'm going to move the blue line in just a second. So pause the screen, get your stuff down, and then I'll keep going. So I'm just going to leave that blue line there. Now I'm going to make this line green to be a different color. This one I will use for part B. So it's said to rotate the line around the origin. Now I believe I've shown you the rotating tool, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And remember, this is how I can spin around wherever that is. It assumes that's my center of rotation. We talked about that briefly. So I'm going to stick this at the origin. So what you would do with your patty paper is you would fold it in fourths and trace the line on where it is, and then spin your quarters so that it's 90 degrees. So here I am with this. I'm going to rotate 90 degrees, and it says clockwise, so that's this direction. Really would help if I had dots, but I think I'm right there now. Not quite. There we go. So that line is now done. Let me put some dots on it, just how I knew I was done. So we've got one right there. My next one is right here. My next one is right there. And if I did it right, the last one will be right there. And so this green line is my rotation. And so write the equation of this. So my y-intercept is -7. And then the slope is here. So it's down 5 and right 3. So that's that. And what we notice, if you recall, we talked about perpendicular lines in the previous problem. And the original slope is 3/5 and my new slope is -5/3. So these lines are perpendicular. So it says right here again, the original line and the rotated line in part B are perpendicular because they form a 90-degree angle. Look at the slopes of the original and make observations. And we already said this. Opposite signs. One is positive, one is negative. And just arrow down a little bit, and reciprocal slopes. Reciprocal slopes. So in layman's terms, opposite reciprocals is we change the sign and flip it over. So perpendicular lines form a right angle, and there we have it. I will continue with the rest of this in the next video, and I'll see you soon.